Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There's a moment, and maybe you've already had it, where you're standing in your own kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter, and you think, who is this person living my life? Not with panic, not with drama. Just this quiet, unsettling stillness. Like you've walked into a house that has your furniture, your photos on the walls, your handwriting on the grocery list, and yet something essential is missing. Something that used to be you. You didn't see it coming. That's the thing nobody tells you about. We talk about midlife like it's a crisis, like it arrives with a sports car and a scandal. But for most women, it doesn't announce itself that way. It sneaks in through the back door. It shows up in a Tuesday afternoon when nothing is technically wrong, and yet your chest feels heavy with something you can't name. It whispers at 3 a.m. when the house is dark and everyone else is sleeping, and you're lying there wondering, is this it? That question? God, that question. Is this it? Because from the outside, everything looks fine. Maybe more than fine. You've built something. You've shown up. For your kids, your marriage, your parents, your work, your friendships, your community. You have done the responsible thing and the loving thing and the selfless thing so many times in a row that somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask what you wanted. Not what you should want. Not what looks good on paper. What you actually genuinely in your bones want. And now you're standing here, somewhere between 55 and 75, give or take, and the unraveling has begun, not a collapse. Don't mistake this for falling apart. This is something far more terrifying and far more sacred than that. This is the thread that has been pulled, the one that makes the whole sweater loosen. And your hands are shaking a little because part of you wants to push it back in and keep the shape you've always known, and another part of you, the quietest, most honest part, is whispering, let it go. Let me tell you something I've come to believe with everything I have. That unraveling, it's not the problem, it's the invitation. But before we can get to that, before we can talk about what's waiting on the other side, we have to be willing to sit with what's actually happening right now. And that means we have to get honest about the weight we carry. The kind that doesn't show up on any doctor's scale. The kind that accumulates slowly, year after year, in the small surrenders. The dream you set aside because the timing wasn't right. The version of yourself you promised you'd come back to. Later, when things calm down. When the kids are older, when there's more money, more time, more. The voice inside you that you learned very early and very efficiently to quiet. Because it was inconvenient. Because it asked for things that felt selfish or impossible or just too much. Here's what I know about women in this season of life. We are extraordinary at holding things together. We are trained for it. We are praised for it. We have been the glue, the anchor, the soft place for everyone else to land. And we are exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Because it's not our bodies that are tired. It's our souls. That's not a metaphor. That is a literal, physiological, psychological truth. When we spend decades suppressing our own needs, our own voice, our own becoming, the self doesn't disappear. It just goes underground. It waits. And somewhere around this age, it starts knocking. Loudly. Sometimes it knocks through restlessness. Sometimes through grief that seems to have no clear source. Sometimes through rage. This hot, bewildering anger that rises up and surprises even you. Sometimes it knocks through the strange ache of watching your children live their lives and feeling not just proud, but envious of their possibility, of their becoming, and then immediately feeling guilty for feeling that. You're not broken for feeling any of this. You're waking up. Stay with me here. Because what comes next? What this unraveling is really made of, and what it's actually asking of you. That's what we need to talk about. And it starts with a truth most people are too afraid to say out loud. Here's the truth nobody says out loud. You didn't lose yourself all at once. You gave yourself away. Slowly. Willingly. One small piece at a time. And usually for someone or something you genuinely loved. That's what makes it so complicated. That's what makes the grief of it so tangled. Because you can't even be fully angry about it. You look back and you see a young woman who was doing her best. Who loved fiercely, who showed up, who said yes when yes was needed and swallowed the no that was rising in her throat because the family needed dinner and the deadline was real and there was always always something more urgent than her own interior life. And now here you are. And the woman who swallowed all those no's, she wants to be heard. Let's talk about what's actually happening in your nervous system right now. Because I want you to understand that what you're feeling isn't weakness. It isn't ingratitude. It isn't a character flaw or a spiritual failure. It is a completely predictable, scientifically documented response to a life lived in chronic self-abandonment. When we consistently place ourselves last, when we override our own needs, our own boundaries, our own desires, the brain and body keep score. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, faithfully, the body keeps a ledger. And somewhere in this season of life, the bill comes due. Psychologists call it identity foreclosure, when we adopt a role so completely that we never fully explore who we are outside of it. Mother, wife, caretaker, professional, daughter. We wear these identities like a second skin until we forget there was ever a self underneath them. And when those roles begin to shift, when the children leave, when the marriage changes, when the career winds down, when the parents we've been caring for are gone, the structure that held our sense of self together starts to tremble. And that trembling, that's what you've been calling your unraveling. But here's what I need you to hear. That trembling isn't collapse. That's excavation. Your psyche is doing something extraordinarily brave. It is clearing away the roles and the rules and the accumulated expectations of a lifetime to find out what's underneath. To find out if you're still there. You are. I promise you, you are still there. There's a concept the great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote about. He called it individuation, the process of becoming, at last, a whole and integrated self. And he believed, not casually but profoundly, after decades of working with the human soul, that this process almost always begins in the second half of life. That the first half is for building the persona, the mask we show the world. And the second half is for finding out who lives behind it. Which means this isn't a crisis. This is a curriculum. You are not falling apart. You are being rebuilt from the inside out. And yes, it is disorienting. Yes, it is uncomfortable in a way that feels nothing like the motivational posters promise. It doesn't feel like a butterfly emerging. It feels like the walls are shifting. It feels like everything you thought was solid is suddenly negotiable. That's supposed to happen. But let's not be too clinical about this. Let's talk about what it actually feels like to be in the middle of it. Because if you're living this right now, you know that it doesn't present itself as a tidy psychological concept. It presents itself as a Thursday afternoon when you burst into tears for no clear reason. It presents itself as a conversation with your oldest friend where you suddenly hear yourself say something you didn't even know you believed. It presents itself as a night where you lie awake and the unspoken truths you've been storing for 30 years start surfacing like quiet whispers you can no longer pretend not to hear. It presents itself in the exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that no longer fits. Because that's the thing about this season, and I say this with all the tenderness I have, some of the lives we've built are beautiful, and some of them are beautiful and too small. Both things can be true. You can love your life and feel suffocated by it. You can be grateful for everything you have and still be starving for something you can't quite name. That's not contradiction. That's honesty. And it takes enormous courage to admit it, even to yourself, even in the privacy of your own mind. So let me ask you something. And I want you to really sit with it. When was the last time you did something, not for a role you play, not for someone who needed you, not because it was responsible or practical or expected, but purely, simply because it was yours, because it came from the inside out rather than the outside in? Take a moment. Actually think about it. For some of you, an answer came quickly and it surprised you. For others, there was just silence. A long, aching silence where the answer should have been. That silence is information. Don't rush past it. Here's another unspoken truth about this particular season of life. And this one is important. The women around you? Many of them are feeling exactly this. The one who looks most together at church on Sunday. The friend whose social media shows grandchildren and garden parties and a life that appears seamless. The neighbor who always has the right thing to say. There is a quiet epidemic of invisible grief among women in this age group. And we almost never talk about it honestly because we were raised in a generation that called it complaining. That told us to count our blessings and keep moving. That rewarded our stoicism and called it strength. But there is a difference between strength and silence. Real strength. The kind that actually sustains you. The kind that carries you through the second half of life with genuine vitality and peace. Real strength requires that you stop pretending. It requires that you let the weight we carry become visible, at least to yourself. Because you cannot heal what you refuse to name. You cannot reclaim a self you're still pretending isn't lost. And this is precisely where the unraveling becomes the most frightening, because naming it means you have to do something about it. It means you have to consider, perhaps for the first time in decades, that your life, your inner life, your becoming, your desires, your untold stories, your unlived chapters, those matter. Not someday. Not when everyone else is settled. Not when you've earned it through sufficient self-sacrifice. Now, they matter now. And somewhere, underneath all the noise and the duty and the beautiful business of the life you've built, you already know that. That's why you're still here. That's why this is landing the way it's landing. Because some part of you recognized itself in these words. Some part of you that has been waiting, patient, persistent, quiet, finally heard someone say the thing out loud. You're not alone in this, and you're not too late. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Eleanor. She was 63 when she sat down across from me. Elegant, composed, the kind of woman who fills a room without trying. She'd raised 3 children, managed a household, held a career together through 2 recessions, cared for her mother through dementia, and somewhere in the middle of all of that, she'd also kept everyone's emotional world from completely falling apart. She was, by every external measure, a success, a pillar. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and said very quietly, "I don't know who I am anymore. And the scariest part is, I'm not sure I ever did." And then she looked up at me, almost apologetically, like she expected me to tell her that was ridiculous. Like she was bracing for me to remind her of all the evidence to the contrary. All the accomplishments, all the love she'd given, all the proof that she was somebody. Instead, I said, "I think that might be the most honest thing you've ever said." And she cried, not politely, not the controlled, dignified tears of a woman who has learned to manage her emotions in public. She wept. The way you weep when something you've been holding for 20 years finally gets set down. The way the body weeps when it's been given permission, at last, to tell the truth. That permission, that's what we're talking about today. Because the turning, the moment when the unraveling stops being something that's happening to you and starts being something you're consciously moving through. It doesn't begin with a plan. It doesn't begin with a vision board or a journal prompt or a list of goals. It begins with something far simpler and far more radical than any of that. It begins with permission. Permission to not be okay with everything. Permission to want more, or different, or something, even when you can't articulate exactly what that something is yet. Permission to look at the life you've built with clear eyes and say, this part is beautiful, and this part no longer fits, and both of those things are true at the same time. Permission to be, after all these years, a person in progress rather than a finished product. That's the turning. It's quieter than you'd expect. It doesn't always announce itself with lightning. Sometimes it's just a moment, a sanctuary of honesty you create inside yourself, where you stop performing and start listening. Listening to the self that went underground. The one that's been waiting. Now I want to talk about something that I think gets terribly misunderstood about this process. Coming back to yourself does not mean abandoning your life. I need to say that again, because I know some of you are sitting there with a flicker of fear. A voice in the back of your mind, whispering, does this mean I have to blow everything up? Does this mean everything I've built wasn't enough? Does this mean I've been wrong about my own life? No. Coming back to yourself means bringing yourself back into your life. It means the woman who got buried under the roles and the responsibilities and the decades of everyone else's needs. She gets to come back to the table. Not instead of the mother, the wife, the grandmother, the friend, but alongside her, as her own distinct, sovereign, irreducible person. Think about what it would mean to move through your days not as a function, not as the person who manages and maintains and holds everything together, but as a woman with an interior life that she actively tends, with desires she takes seriously, with a voice she trusts, with curiosity about her own becoming that hasn't been extinguished by time or responsibility. What would that feel like in your body? Sit with that for a second. Don't analyze it, just feel it. There are 3 quiet whispers I've heard from women at this crossroads. 3 things the unraveling is almost always asking for. And they're not grand gestures. They're not dramatic reinventions. They are, in many ways, devastatingly simple. The first whisper is this: tell the truth. Not to everyone, not all at once, but somewhere, in a journal, in a trusted friendship, in a therapist's office, in the privacy of your own heart. Start naming what's real. The hunger you've been dismissing. The grief you've been outrunning. The version of yourself you've been pretending you're not missing. The dreams that still pulse somewhere underneath everything, embarrassingly persistent, quietly alive. The truth doesn't have to be comfortable to be healing. It just has to be honest. And there is something almost alchemical that happens when we stop managing our inner life and start actually meeting it. When we stop organizing our feelings into acceptable categories and allow ourselves to simply feel what we feel. That's not weakness. That is the beginning of reclamation. The second whisper is this: give yourself back your time, even small pieces of it, even imperfect, stolen, irregular pieces. I'm not talking about a 2-week vacation or a complete restructuring of your schedule. I'm talking about the radical act of carving out space, real space, protected space, recurring space that belongs entirely to you, not productive time, not time you've earned by finishing everything else first, just yours. Because here's what I've watched happen over and over again with women in this season. When they are finally given permission to have unstructured time that belongs only to them, they don't know what to do with it. They feel guilty. They fill it. They find someone who needs something. And this tells us everything we need to know about how thoroughly we have been trained to believe that our own presence, our own enjoyment, our own rest, our own exploration requires justification. It doesn't. Your time is not a reward for sufficient productivity. Your time is your life. And you get to spend some of it on yourself without earning it first. Start small if you need to. 30 minutes on a Wednesday morning that belongs to no one but you. A walk with no destination and no podcast in your ears. Just you and the world and whatever arises. A creative practice you abandoned 20 years ago that you pick back up with no pressure to be good at it. A book you read purely for pleasure. A room in your house, even a corner of one, that you make into a sanctuary. Somewhere that holds only what you love. These aren't luxuries. These are lifelines. The third whisper, and this one is the deepest, is this: allow yourself to be becoming. One of the most damaging stories we tell women in the second half of life is that their becoming is behind them. That the becoming years were youth and early adulthood and all the firsts. The first career, the first love, the first home, the building years. And now you're in the maintenance years. The legacy years, the graceful wending down years. What a devastating lie. Some of the most profound psychological and spiritual growth available to a human being happens in exactly this season. Not despite the losses and the transitions and the unraveling, but because of them. Because when the scaffolding of our constructed lives begins to shift, we are finally, truly forced to confront what's underneath. And what's underneath, when we have the courage to look, is not emptiness. It's essence. It's the self that was always there, before the roles were assigned and the expectations were absorbed and the years of loving others at the expense of yourself accumulated. That self doesn't age. That self doesn't expire. That self is waiting with extraordinary patience for you to come home. Eleanor came back to see me 6 months after that first session. She was different, not dramatically, not in any way you'd necessarily clock from the outside. She still had the same life. The same family, the same address. But something in her had changed position. She held herself differently. She spoke with a directness she hadn't had before. And when I asked her what had shifted, she thought about it for a long moment. Then she said, "I stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to be a person." That's it. That's the whole turning. Right there in one sentence. You don't need to wait anymore. The permission was always yours to give. There's a particular kind of mourning that becomes possible on the other side of this. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a sunrise moment with orchestral music and sudden clarity about everything. It's quieter than that, more ordinary. You wake up. Maybe it's early. Maybe the light is just starting to come through the curtains. And before the day's demands rush in, before the mental list assembles itself, before you start calculating what everyone needs from you, there's a moment, just a breath, just a small, still pocket of something that feels remarkably like peace. Not because everything is resolved, not because the hard things are gone or the losses are undone or life has suddenly become uncomplicated, but because somewhere in the process of your unraveling, something shifted in your relationship with yourself. And that shift, that quiet, irreversible shift, changes everything. Not the circumstances, the experience of the circumstances, the woman who moves through the day, the quality of her presence, the depth of her breath, the way she speaks to herself when no one is listening. That's what waits on the other side. Not a perfect life, an inhabited one. I want to talk about what reclamation actually looks like. Not the inspirational version, the real version. Because I think we've been sold a story about self-discovery that looks like a dramatic transformation. And what actually happens is both more modest and more profound than that. Reclamation looks like the woman who spent 40 years unable to say no, learning slowly and imperfectly and with enormous discomfort. To let no be a complete sentence, not a negotiation, not an apology followed by an explanation followed by an alternative offer. Just no. And feeling the guilt of it and sitting with the guilt and not caving and discovering, to her astonishment, that the relationship survived, that the people who truly love her didn't leave, that the world did not, in fact, come apart because she chose herself. Reclamation looks like the woman who gave up painting in her 30s because there wasn't time, who buys a canvas at 67 and stands in front of it, and doesn't know what she's doing and does it anyway. Not because she's going to become an artist, not because the painting will be good, but because the act of making something purely for herself, with her own hands on her own time, for no one's approval, is a form of self-restoration she didn't know she needed until she felt it. Reclamation looks like the conversation, the long overdue, terrifying, ultimately liberating conversation with a spouse or a child or a sibling or a friend, where the woman finally says the thing she's been not saying for years, where she stops managing the other person's feelings long enough to express her own, where she risks being seen, actually seen, instead of admired, and where she discovers that being truly known, even imperfectly, even in the messy middle of it, is worth more than any amount of being thought of as capable and composed. Reclamation is not a single moment. It's a practice. It's a direction you keep choosing again and again, even when the old patterns pull hard in the other direction. And they will pull. I want to be honest with you about that. The old patterns don't dissolve simply because you've named them. The self-abandonment that kept you safe and approved of and useful for decades. It doesn't release its grip overnight just because you've decided it's time. There will be mornings when you wake up and immediately feel the magnetic pull back toward the familiar. Back toward putting everyone else first. Back toward smallness, because smallness, in a strange and painful way, feels like home. Expect that. Don't be discouraged by it. The measure of this work isn't whether the old patterns return. They will. The measure is what you do when they do. Whether you notice them now. Whether you pause where you used to rush forward automatically. Whether you ask yourself, even once, even briefly, is this mine to carry? Is this what I actually want? Is this the woman I'm becoming, or the woman I'm trying to leave behind? That pause, that one breath of self-awareness, that's the whole practice over and over again, unremarkably, daily. Until the new way of being starts to feel more like home than the old one did. And it will. I've watched it happen too many times to doubt it. There is something I believe about women in this season of life that I want to say plainly without decoration, because it deserves to be said without fuss. You are not past your prime. I know the culture tells you otherwise. I know the culture stopped paying attention to you somewhere around your 50th birthday and has been increasingly invested in your invisibility ever since. I know that the world was built to celebrate the young and the ascending, and that women over 60 are handed a very specific and very limited script. The wise grandmother, the graceful elder, the woman who has done her part and now steps gently to the side. I want to take that script and set it on fire. Because the women I have known, truly known in the depth of their inner lives, who have done this work of reclamation in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, they are some of the most alive human beings I have ever encountered. Not because they've resolved everything, not because they've achieved some permanent state of enlightenment, but because they have stopped pretending, because they have chosen, against considerable cultural pressure, to keep becoming, to keep asking what they want, to keep tending their own interior world with the same devotion they spent decades given to everyone else's. There is a particular freedom that becomes available only after you've stopped caring quite so much what everyone thinks. And it doesn't arrive in youth. It can't. It requires the specific seasoning of a life lived long enough to know that other people's opinions of you are ultimately not your emergency. That freedom. That is not a consolation prize for aging. That is one of the great gifts of this season. So let me ask you, and this is the question I want to leave you sitting with, not because I have the answer, but because you do, somewhere underneath everything. Who would you be if you stopped shrinking to fit the space others made for you? Not who you should be. Not who would make everyone comfortable. Not the responsible answer or the humble answer or the answer that comes pre-approved. Who would you actually be? What would you do with a Tuesday morning that belonged entirely to you? What conversation would you finally have? What would you create or learn or say or feel or pursue if you genuinely believed in your cells that you were allowed? That it wasn't too late? That the second half of your life was not a footnote to the first half, but its own complete and extraordinary story? Because here's what I know. The women who ask that question, who sit with it honestly, who let it unsettle them and rearrange them, they don't find a different life waiting on the other side. They find themselves waiting. They find the self that went underground all those years ago, still there, still intact, still carrying the quiet whispers of everything she ever wanted to be. And she is not bitter. That's the part that always moves me. She's not angry at the years. She's not mourning the time. She is simply waiting to be welcomed home. With the same patience and the same faithfulness she showed you while you were busy building everything else. This is what the midlife unraveling is really about. Not the loss of who you were, the finding of who you've always been. The roles were real. The love was real. The life you built was real, and it mattered, and it was yours. But underneath all of it, patient as a seed in winter, persistent as something that refuses to die, was a woman who had her own story to tell, her own voice to use, her own becoming to tend. She hasn't given up on you. She's just been waiting for you to stop giving up on her. The unraveling that frightened you. It was her knocking. And you, by sitting with this, by letting these words land, by being willing to feel what you've been feeling without immediately managing it away, you just opened the door. Welcome home.